Hello and welcome to the CRM Zen Show, where we talk about all things Zoho. This is episode 141. Yep, DataPrep. Recorded on Friday, April 9th, 2021. From Zenatta Consulting, I'm Brett Martin.
And I'm Tyler Colt, and let's get right on into the show.
So we'll start with our announcements and events. We've got a special CRM Zen show next week. It's going to be at 10 a.m. PST. We'll do our usual 9:30 kind of warm up, but I think we'll probably be starting closer to 10. And we've got Raju Vagnesa on, and he is the chief evangelist for Zoho and an all-around great guy. If you've been to any of the Zoho events, you see him. He's one of the keynote speakers all the time. And we're going to talk about 25 years of Zoho and other things. He's going to sit in on the whole show as well. So that's going to be fun. And then our webinar coming up, Zoho People Overview and Best Practices. Tyler and I know absolutely nothing about it. Other people in our team do all of those things. So they're going to sit down with us and bring us totally up to speed. And thank God it's just overview and best practices, Tyler, because I think otherwise we might be in big trouble ourselves. But thank God for Raquel. She's going to save us on this one. And then some other upcoming events. Zoho's got one called Enriching Customer Support Through Automation, and that's going to be on Tuesday, April 13th. And check at crmzen.com/events if you would like to know all about the other cool things coming up. And with that, let's dive right on into the news. So we have some March updates for Zoho CRM and Backstage. These are kind of the general basic, here's what happened last month kind of thing. We covered most of these. I will say on the CRM Zen one, though, I must have missed this, but over on the Zoho blog, they did a periodic table of marketing extensions, which I did think was pretty clever. They got 40 extensions across 7 categories. So that was back in February, actually. This is the March update. But anyway, some cool stuff here. If you subscribe to our newsletter, you probably get most of this. But if not, I would check this out. And one of our regular listeners, actually in the chat room right now, Kevin Flynn, is even in the newsletter as a community MVP. He shared a code snippet on copying a custom field across from accounts to quotes. Shout out to Kevin. Good stuff. So check out the Community Digest. You can find it over in the Zoho community, and we're taking a look at. And then we also have what's new in March for Backstage. Most of this we already covered. They made some changes to your ability to actually, on your microsites, you've got color gradients and overlays and rich text editor, which we talked about. One of the cool things on here, Tyler, is that you can actually now project questions that are posted during a session to all participants. That's kind of handy, I think. I didn't realize you could do that.
especially with their digital meetings with Backstage and with On Air, right? Or their digital events that they're running there. That's a very nice feature to have.
Yeah, what's interesting about all these webinars, whether it's Zoom or Showtime or this, it's funny, but when you do a poll or you do something like that, they never show up on the recordings. So it's kind of weird when you go back and edit, you got to kind of completely redo them. So maybe if you're listening over at Zoho, that would be a cool thing to add into Backstage and Showtime as well. So anyway, good stuff there. And then in another bit of news here, Zoho has launched the Zoho Academy. We think, Tyler, we stumbled across this. It appears it may have been around for a little bit. But it's kind of interesting. If you click into any of the categories here, you've got just all sorts of ebooks and various other things that they've put together. I found it to be, don't you get a chance to kind of go through this?
I kind of poked through it. It's nice in the sense that they provide a lot of different business insights for various parts of, whatever your organization is doing. But it's not very salesy, right? These aren't really things that are focused on selling you Zoho products. They're really just like helpful guides in general, right? About, things like market research, marketing automation, and, so on and so forth.
Yeah, but it goes, they've got them on marketing, site building. Anyway, fascinating stuff. They've spent some time putting these things together, clearly. I think it's been around for a little bit, but I don't know. We hadn't stumbled across it before, so probably worth taking a look at if you haven't seen that. And then let's get right to it. Zoho has launched a brand new app called DataPrep. So what do you think, Tyler?
So it's an interesting application. Basically it seems like it's made by the team that put together Zoho Analytics. It's a pretty similar UI. Kind of the goal with this application, right, is you can spin up a workspace, right? You can add multiple different tables into it, and then run some kind of basic data cleanup, a data analysis, or even some basic table joins, right, between the various sources that you've loaded into the system. I did have a chance to poke around and play with it a little bit. So far, it's okay. Well, the big drawback for me when I was using this myself is that when you're loading in a data set, you really only get about a quarter of the data to review and work with inside of DataPrep. So the way that it works in essence is like, I would load in a sheet of, let's say 200,000 rows. It gives me 40,000 to run any of these updates to, trim spaces, truncate, adding prefixes and suffixes, creating buckets or kind of really basic cluster analysis. And then you can also be doing joins from other tables. So very basic SQL joins, right? We're talking just like inner, outer, left, and right. Those are your only options. No like aggregation functions or anything in those. But the challenge is that you're only working with a small sample of the data. So if you were to take, 2 random samples from 2 spreadsheets that have, 200,000 rows, and then you want to do a join on those, right, to kind of get a quick look at, what percentage of records in one are going to be in the other. Because you're working with a random sample within the tool, you can't really see that. So I guess, you could use it that way and then export it. So once you export a file, it runs the permutations that you've done to the sample data to the entire sheet. But I just think for me, I would really like to see this and work with the entire data set, because though 200,000 rows sounds like a lot, when you're doing more advanced data preparation and data analysis, that's not too many rows. We'd like to be able to work with that in its entirety, even if it does take a little time to load or time to run some of these operations.
Yeah, I had high hopes for this. I still do. I mean,
the tools are there and like the UI is good. A couple little things are odd. Like if you click anything, it like highlights it and pops open like multiple things. It's a little like startling. But like there's a lot of value in this tool. It's just that I guess maybe for what I tried to do with it, which was some actual real data analysis of like, matching conditions and, how many records that are in one table or in another. Because you're working with a sample set in here, you would have to export it to run it on the whole set before you could really dig into that. So I ended up just loading this stuff into analytics and doing it in SQL because I'm just more comfortable there and I could see the entire data set at once.
Yeah, I mean, from a cleanup perspective, I can't think of the name of the company. We've covered them in a previous episode. AbleBits, right? Which basically is nice in that, they've got an Excel extension as well as a Google Sheet extension that allows you to go through and do a ton of, I would say, more cleanup and normalization. This potentially goes beyond that, right? It has a lot of the same thing: change the case, split, trim. Those are all things you have to do and go through, and it would be just nifty to kind of have a tool that's set specifically for cleaning data, because that's, even though the AbleBits one is nice, this is very specific, So,
and there's definitely some use case here for like pre-processing data. I didn't dig into it before this show here, but I'm assuming once you have this data processed, you could connect to analytics and actually pull data from here. So I could actually see a pretty big use case if you're working with like a lot of data, and rather than loading all of your data into analytics and doing some joins there, maybe you want to load your tables here and kind of join them into one master and then just sync that. Though a lot of people are never going to hit their data limits in analytics, because they're pretty generous based on your organization size. If you're bumping into those limits, having a little kind of pre-processing zone like this that isn't consuming your data cap in analytics could be pretty valuable. So take my kind of feedback with a grain of salt. There's a lot of good tools in this. Just for me, without being able to work with the whole data set, some of the options in this are a little bit less useful.
Could you not work with the data set because it's in beta right now, or is that the current way it's set
That's
up?
a good question. I'm not sure. Hopefully they'll open it up. I do understand though, on a flip side, if you're loading in millions of rows into this, it is relatively normal with tools like this to work with a sample. Like that's not unique to Zoho DataPrep.
Right.
When you're working with large data sets, you're oftentimes going to take a sample. But just some of the operations that you can do in this don't really make sense if you're working with random samples. And you can take like an initial or an end sample. So you could try to cheat the system by like sorting it on email, then uploading it, then taking initial samples from all your data sets to try to make it more consistent. But that feels kind of like trickery that I wouldn't want to do when I'm using a tool like this.
But you run into that with Google Sheet as well, and all of them, even because they'll only take sheets up to certain sizes, right? And so oftentimes you do have to go to Excel for that. You need a local application. I think there's a lot of, anyway.
There's a lot of value here, though. For someone, if you're not very comfortable in Excel, you load something in here, and for something like adding prefixes or splitting columns, you don't really need to see that on the entire data set to know that it worked. So as a place to kind of like float a sheet in, add some prefixes, split some columns, and then, pop it back out completed. If you're not a wizard with Excel, this could save you some time.
All right. Moving on, I kind of skipped over something here. We also have in March some marketplace additions as well. So there were a whole bunch of 29 new extensions for Zoho CRM that were loaded in here. I kind of went through some of these. It's interesting. There is one now for that's also a new LinkedIn one that I found here called LinkedIn Finder, which is kind of interesting. We use linkmatch.net. I checked this one out. This actually is native in the CRM. So when you're in a contact, you click, it goes out, it does its best bet to try to find that contact. It's a little tough. I will tell you, having using LinkMatch, I will put someone's name in, and I've kind of got to search around in LinkMatch to you actually find the person you're looking for in LinkedIn, and then that kind of does it. But someone taking another try at it, and then another one called LinkPort, which is going to import your LinkedIn contacts to Zoho CRM, and it'll pull in all of their details, which is pretty cool in and of itself. So anyway, some cool thing. I don't know if any of these jumped out at you.
Nothing stood out too crazy here. I'd be interested to see some of those new LinkedIn connections. I know that's just like a huge usage, right? I mean, we see a ton of people using LinkMatch. So the more tools that are available there, the better.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. And moving on in the news, Zoho Sheet has some dynamic array formulas. I actually went and I looked at this. It's kind of, they're doing some really cool stuff here. If you had a chance to watch these videos, you're basically allowed to build formulas with drag and drop and kind of do it in a methodology that you don't really, I don't know. I don't see it in Google Sheets. I haven't worked too much in Excel lately. But they've got some really nifty things, especially around air checking as well. And then they've added 2 new operators, at and hash, which allow you to kind of parse out different things in the formulas and arrays you're setting up. I think this is kind of useful. I'm just fascinated as Zoho Sheet continues to add a lot of interesting new functions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting one here. We're kind of taking these totals. I agree. I've not really seen this in Excel, playing around with it there, though I haven't done any deep dive builds in Excel in a little while now, I will admit.
Yeah, but anyway, cool stuff there. So kudos to the Zoho Sheet team. And also Zoho Show has now added a centralized library where you can actually manage all of your templates and presentations. They also did a whole blog this week around a whole bunch of templates specifically for business-specific templates they've started to roll out. So kind of this organization of the Zoho Show library is something that they've really been working on. Last week, they did a whole thing with the iOS app, which I played around with more this week. Super, super nice.
Yeah, they just keep working on these Office applications over time. I think every month, they get closer to being in parity or better than a lot of the other competitors. We still have our little critiques of Show with some of the basic formatting stuff, but they're layering on more and more functionality into these applications.
Yeah, I mean, we are almost through with our migration over to WorkDrive. There's just very few things left over there. We did our last webinar completely in Zoho Show. We're no longer in, Google Slides. Is that what it's called? Out of that, I like it. I think we found the build process was good. The speed on it was good. They've got their own quirkiness. I would say that Show is maybe one of the weaker of the Zoho Office apps, but it's coming up. It's coming up pretty quick. I mean, their Zoho Sheet and Zoho Writer, I love, and WorkDrive. Wow. You were talking the other day how much you love WorkDrive so much better than Google Drive now.
Yeah, I mean, and some of that's a preference thing. I just don't like the bubble UI in Google Drive. I don't think it's intuitive for managing files unless you just have not very many files, right? Then you can kind of get through the bubbles quickly. But yeah, I like lists. I like rows and columns, and so WorkDrive works a little better for my brain.
Yeah, I love the unread feature, which is so unique. I've never seen it in any sort of a Drive thing like that. But if you're in WorkDrive and somebody goes and they make an edit to one of your documents, it kind of shows up as unread. So you without having to get notifications, you can just go and look through the unread. So some super nice stuff there. Alrighty, and then there have been some enhancements to Zoho subscriptions. What do you think, buddy?
So kind of in line with the books updates, the big one here is the developer space. Previously, in a lot of these different finance apps, you didn't have one place to actually see all of your API call usage. So if you have some type of integration running awry and you're hitting your credit limit, there was no way to actually know, exactly what calls are being made to, reach that limit. So they've added this to be in parity with Zoho Books and Zoho Inventory, so you're just able to easily track where all of those calls are coming from. They also now have brought in advanced analytics into subscriptions. This, again, is in line with what they've been doing a lot. They're kind of starting to embed Zoho Analytics in most of these other tools. So kind of just right when you spin it up, it'll create that workspace for you. I will say one little minor headache with this is that it'll try to create its own workspace when oftentimes you want to gather all of your data into one workspace to report on it together. So just be a little careful with that. If you go ahead and spin this up, that you want to make sure that you point this data to, one consolidated space so that you could, for example, report on subscriptions versus CRM data or versus desk data. You'll need that all to be in one workspace.
And really, this is just showing you the analytics reports without leaving subscriptions, right?
Yeah, it's just an embed.
Yeah. Alrighty, and then over in Zoho Books, we had some updates. Most of these are for India and the UK, but there does appear that there is an advanced search on tax, which is interesting. So they've kind of added that feature into the search in Zoho Books. I'm really happy to see this. There have been some other changes in Zoho Books. It's one of the applications I work in all the time with our clients, and search has always been a tad bit lacking, but it's been getting a heck of a lot better recently. So that's kind of nice. And then the rest of this kind of ties into, I think, what we talked about last week. You can now track the sequence in your audit log. We talked about that audit log that was rolling out last week for India. And then in the UK, you can track domestic reverse charge for your sales and purchases. So if you're in the UK, you probably know what that means. I imagine it has to do with that. And there you go. And then there were some small updates to iOS version as well. I'm assuming that some of these are global, but now you can also have multiple branches in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, and Qatar. All righty. And that takes us to our implementation of the week. What do you got, Tyler?
Yeah, this is one that we built just strictly within the CRM, and it's kind of a use case to capture a commonly needed statistic, which is basically, how many touches does it take to get us from point A to point B? And you can define point A to point B as either through a particular stage or maybe all the way from when an opportunity is created to closed won. And so this one, in this case, we actually wanted to count both of these so that you could basically report on the idea of, if we have if we've had a demo with someone, how many touches does it take to get them to request a proposal, right? And so on and so forth. And so what we did is we created a stateless function, which is kind of a new thing in Zoho, that basically just runs on an API call, and it increases the count of 2 different stages by 1. So if you hit this endpoint, it'll increase the outbound touches for the current stage by 1, and it'll increase the outbound touches for the total by 1. And then what we do is, because you want to track outbound touches for a variety of different actions, like a call or an email or an SMS, we just have a workflow in each of those modules that calls the stateless function. So regardless of where it starts, you basically send your opportunity ID to this function, and then it runs to increase those counts. The big advantage there is that if you wanted to build on this over time, you wouldn't need to make edits to multiple different functions to keep your math correct, because they're all just calling one centralized function. So outside of just this implementation, the new stateless functions, I think we're going to find usage for all over the place. And then what will happen as you kind of move forward in the stages is, when you update the stage, we actually stamp to a historical log. It's kind of like a custom version of stage history that we made that basically captures the previous stage and then the amount of touches that happened in that stage. And then when you update that stage, it'll actually reset the field for the touches in a current stage back to 0, so that it starts tracking the touches in the newly entered stage. A couple of reasons we did it this way is that you can tease these values out just looking at the activities related list, but it requires some complicated SQL, because you basically have to marry the opportunity, the child activities, and then the stage history with some like cadence reporting. So you're looking to do kind of funky SQL statements where you're counting activities within the start and end of a certain stage history line. So you can like hammer on it in analytics to get these values. But this way basically just generates it as a related list that's really easily reportable, and it's visible to the sales rep, so they can actually see if you were to pick up someone else's opportunity, how many touches it's taking to move things along.
Yeah, that's super clean. Are you individually counting the calls, emails, and SMSs, or just lumping them all together into one?
They're lumped all together. They don't need to be done that way, but in this case, the goal was to lump them together into a general outbound bucket.
So how many touches by every single stage of the deal? You're doing this in deals? This is in deals. But you could do this in leads. You could do this in anywhere.
Sure.
Slick. Boy, that's, there's several clients. I mean, a lot of companies really want to track this, especially depending on how many salespeople they have. They're looking at, say, man, how many touches does this salesperson take to get it to this level, and kind of moving forward through it. I think it'd be interesting too, in a form of A/B testing, right? Do you move it faster if you're putting them on this track, or if you're putting them on this track? Cool stuff. All right. And that brings us to our read of the week. This was pretty cool. So over at Customer Think, Shali, you want to give me a shot on that name there?
I don't even.
I'm going to say Shailendu Verma actually wrote an article for Customer Think on how to budget for a CRM implementation. And I like this. I kind of went through, oftentimes we're talking to clients and they're trying to justify, what should we do? What should we automate? What should go into the CRM? And this kind of breaks down various things that you might want to consider. And at the very end, he's even got a little calculator that you can use to see if you should actually migrate. And of course you should, and like an implementation guide you should go through. But, I think we go through this oftentimes, when we get everybody in the room and we sit down and we're talking about what they want to do and where they want to go. And then, you get that implementation done. I think as you get deeper into implementations, I think the initial value of the CRM pretty clearly proves itself out. And then you start getting into these little tiny things like, if we automate this, how much time do we actually save? Right. I think kind of like just what you just did with that one thing, but I don't know. What you think of the article?
Yeah, I think it's a good read because you always are thinking about the cost, right? Because implementing a CRM can be costly, from the software license to professional services and development and everything that you need. But I like the approach here of kind of framing it within the context of like, yeah, but the flip side is you're going to increase your sales, right? Even if you're able to increase revenue by 2% as a result of this, the change effort pays for itself many times over. And kind of early in the article, they actually do a net present value example calculation, right? Of the cost of spinning this up versus the future returns. And, as long as your implementation goes smoothly and the team adopts the system, you'll be hard pressed to lose money on rolling out sales automations.
Yeah. And I think, like we say, oftentimes you really have to look at how many hours are going to be saved by doing some of these automations. I will say, I think we both run into this a lot. We'll have clients that want us to automate something for automation's sake, and it's literally just 2 clicks. That's maybe only going to take 3 seconds, and we can't understand that automation. But there are some automations that make absolutely so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, head on over to Customer Think. They've always got some good things, and this is a fairly nice article as well. All right, moving over to what is new on Zenatta.com. Since we're doing Zoho People, we're kind of doing some things around recruit and kind of have our articles based around HR this week. So we have 5 interview questions you should ask every single job candidate. I think we need to start asking these questions. I read through this. I've seen this before. It's actually a well-written article. It goes through everything that you may want to delve into, and I think there's some good thought here. So maybe we should start applying some of the stuff we write to our business practices. Tyler, what do you think?
Can't hurt.
And then we've got 5 job boards that integrate with Zoho Recruit, and we're kind of picking out the top ones here and their overall integration functions. These are just the big guys, huh, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of usual suspects here from Indeed, LinkedIn, Monster, of course. Interesting inclusion for Facebook as well as Glassdoor. So you actually are able to tie in the Facebook API and capture leads that way for your recruiting pipeline. I will say, as one point to highlight, some of these sources, I know Indeed specifically, the integration with Recruit requires you to sponsor your posts. So if you're planning on doing that, you might just want to set aside a tiny little budget that would be required to sponsor it. You can go basically at the minimum of their limit, and that'll activate that integration. But some of those, they actually do require sponsored posts.
And we found yet another guide, and this one's actually timely, how HR technology can add value to your business. Nice job, Zoho. I don't know where we came up with it, but we've now added this into our resource guides as well. So check that out over at Zenatta.com. And that brings us to the application of the week. This I just found yesterday. Shout out to Brad. He's actually one of our clients as well as a listener to the show. And he actually brought this up as a potential app of the week. So we have all struggled with the email parser inside Zoho CRM. It is fine, but it is fairly limited, I would say, right?
It's kind of just the most basic parser.
Yeah.
Right.
And everything has got to be very clearly defined. And if the email template that is parsing, for those of you who don't know what an email parser is, you have the ability when an email comes in, you can actually have Zoho look at that email, read through it, and pull out various contextual information, the client's name, their company, address. You see this oftentimes in real estate. Leads are coming in from these various sources, and you want to take them and drop them in. And from there, you basically want to parse that information and add it into the CRM. There is a native email parser in Zoho, and it's okay, but it has trouble with, I would say, loosely formatted data or data that might change a little bit. And so there is a company out there called Mail Parser, the Mail Parser IO, and all they do is parsing. And according to Brad, this thing is rock solid and nifty enough too. It's got a native integration for Zoho CRM. I mean, you basically just connect the account, map your fields, and away you go. But this looks like a pretty cool thing. We don't see many people. I don't know. Are we running into a lot of mail parser requests lately, or are we just not?
We try not to. We try not to, because most form services, if they could send an email, they could probably post a webhook. And if you can do it that way where you're not passing it through a parser, you're just going to have better luck. And that being said, like, not all parsers are created equal, right? Some of them are going to do a better job parsing through HTML or kind of heavier emails. But really, we use parsing as a last resort, right? If we're married to a form service, or maybe you're getting data from an internal source, like you're mentioning, like, oftentimes in real estate, you don't get to control how you get things. They're going to email out leads. So you kind of use them when you need to. But if you can get around it, you want to either do some type of regular import or hit the API to get data into the CRM.
Yeah. This is kind of above and beyond. They have another product called Doc Parser that you can mail with this, that you can merge with this or use together. And it'll actually look at an attachment and then pull the data out of the attachment as well.
That's pretty slick.
There's some really cool stuff here. So, if you are struggling with this, I think it is probably worth taking a look at. All right. And that brings us to what is, by the way, the pricing on it. I should cover that real quickly. Pricing on it is, 500 emails a month is going to cost you $40. 2,000 emails a month is going to cost you $99 a month. And then 10,000 emails a month is $299 a month. So well worth it, just in the amount of time it would save you.
Absolutely.
So if you're doing that kind of stuff, worth taking a look at. And it brings us to our tip of the week. Well, we've done our beginner's guides for this month, Tyler. We sat down this week and we did 5 beginner's guides on Zoho Books. And this first one is basically on banking and going ahead and setting up your bank accounts and kind of the little quirks associated with that, but how to actually pull your live feeds into Zoho Books for you. So I think we've got 5 of those coming out. We've got a whole series. So look for those. They'll be dropping every week over on YouTube. All right, Tyler, and that is going to wrap up our show for today. If you have any questions or comments, please send them to us at info@zenatta.com or info@crmzen.com.
And on our website is where you can find complete episodes as well as show notes with links to the stories we discussed today. As always, you can follow us on your favorite social media platform and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, as well as on YouTube. We'll see you next Monday.